So I thought, I'm going to do the Beatles, which scared me at the time to say, I'm actually going to set forward and take a stab at what if the Beatles stayed together. But I found it to be endlessly fascinating. And Once There Was a Way actually tells, as if it's a Rolling Stone magazine kind of article looking back on the Beatles' success over the last 50 years. And it tells their story and focusing on what I call the years of maximum danger. We know the Beatles broke up in 69 and 70. They had issues, and by 70 it was all over, but it started really in 69 in a very strong way with Lennon. And I tried to ask myself, these books are not time travel books. They're not magic books. There's no portals or anything like that. They're just alternate history books that are meant to sound and be realistic. So I asked myself, what are the realistic ways that the Beatles might have overcome what were personal differences and professional differences and stayed together? Because the truth is, I'm sure you and your listeners have personal and professional differences with people, and you don't break up all the time. You work them out.
Yeah.
Many people do. So I really tried to create a world where this could happen, and boy, did it blow open into a great, fascinating world. So I focus on the years I call of maximum danger, where in our timeline they broke up in 1970. I focus on 70 through 75 and tell that story where these guys managed to keep their friendship still alive and the bonds that had kept them together strong enough to overcome what would still be very difficult, challenging times for them.
I wonder if there was any, I know they tried to get them back together.
Yeah.
You know, that was a big goal. And there was just like no money that could do it, obviously.
No
at
money
the time.
couldn't do it. And I'm trying to find a way to enter that debate earlier. That was people after they were seriously broken up, trying to get them together for a one-off or whatever.
Yeah.
And those stories are well known to Beatles fans.
Yeah.
I just thought, I'm going to do something I've not read before. And quite often, when I've written screenplays on spec or books, it's the book I wanted to read, and I couldn't find it, so I wrote it. I did that with AD After Disclosure, certainly was Surrounded by Enemies, and now with Once There Was a Way. I just wanted to put one thing out because people always ask. We've built a pretty solid website to show people what this concept is all about, and it's very simple to remember. It's simply whatifbeatles.com.
Oh, that's
so you can remember What If Beatles, whatifbeatles.com. And for people that actually just want to, buy the ticket and take the ride, then they can get it on Amazon at amazonbeatles.com. Mm-hmm. And we've even done a video of the Beatles playing together in 1971 at George Harrison's house on a brand new Beatles song that we had made for this for marketing. Yeah. And it's called morebeatles.com. So you got three: whatifbeatles.com, morebeatles.com, amazonbeatles.com. So, and by the way, I was pretty shocked that you can still buy a URL called amazonbeatles.com.
Yeah.
That was insane, so I was happy about that.
Yeah.
And I've just enjoyed the process of talking to people about this. And you know what's so gratifying to me as an author is the comments on Amazon and on other locations have been so uniformly positive. And the thing that people seem to be responding to that really warms my heart, if you will, is that this is something we all kind of wished could have happened. Yeah. I mean, the Rolling Stones are still playing together.
Right.
Why couldn't the Beatles have been still playing together, right?
Yeah.
So people are responding by saying, it gave me a chance to spend a few hours in a world where they stayed together. And, we live in a world of Trump and dissension and everything. So here's a chance to think about the Beatles. And they just really found it interesting. Now, I will say this. This is not all champagne and roses.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, they had to get through all their
yeah.
problems.
I mean, I'm a dramatist at heart. I don't write stories without conflict. Mm-hmm. And the Beatles story has lots of conflict. So what I've done with my drama is try to find some interesting, credible, realistic ways that they could have resolved their conflicts.
Now I know Yoko. I'm sorry. Yoko. Boy, I'm going to get bashed for that one.
We all have brain farts like that once in a while.
Yeah. So Yoko was a part of it.
Right. Well, you've just raised the $64,000 question,
Yeah.
though, because if you ask most people, they'd say Yoko Ono, broke up the Beatles. Now, Paul McCartney says that's not true, but most fans tend to lay that at Yoko's feet. So I knew that the most important thing this book had to do is treat the Yoko dissension in a credible way, and to find a way where not only could Yoko and John have found a way to modify slightly to keep things going, but the other Beatles could find a way to accept that John was not going to be part of any group that didn't have something to do with Yoko, right? Everybody had to give a little bit. It's sort of like when you make a deal in Hollywood right now, the idea is it's only a good deal if both parties hate it. And then you made a good deal, right? Mm-hmm. So I tried to apply that a little bit to the Beatles, that, nobody's happy. They're not, again, champagne and roses. No, that didn't happen in this book. Nobody's happy. Everybody is just seeing the larger issue. And without going on too much, and just give a couple of things that are not really spoilers to me, but people do not know that the Beatles almost starred in Lord of the Rings in the early 70s. And so in this book, for example, the Beatles actually star in The Lord of the Rings, directed by Stanley Kubrick, something that almost happened. I'm not making this up. You can check it out. And McCartney has even told Peter Jackson the same. What I tried to look for were things like that, and other things where you could say certain things prevent you from announcing a breakup, right? Even the Beatles, when Lennon tried to get out in our timeline in the late '69, they said, "Please, we got other, we're making a deal with for different royalties. Can't you sit on this for a while?" So he did. Okay, so there's already precedent. So if you're making a movie, you need to publicize it. Well, it's certainly not going to be accepted by the studio that you're publicizing a movie while you're breaking up, right? So I tried to find little elements like that, and also that were fun. The Beatles did not play at Woodstock in our time frame, right? But they were invited. They were invited. They could have done it. They were busy recording Abbey Road. They could have practiced a few songs and got on a plane and gone to Woodstock. Well, they do in this book, and in fact, there's things that happen in the time stream as a consequence. Think about it.
Sure.
In this book, Once There Was a Way, the Beatles do play at Woodstock, but because it's so out of control,
it would have to be out of control.
They almost get killed
Yeah.
by the crowd size, the surging crowd, and it comes close to killing them. Well, what does that do to them? It makes them say, we have to pay a lot more attention to security. If we're going to continue to show up at places, we have to pay some attention to this, right? And so what would that mean? Well, it would mean going forward that John Lennon, if he was living in the Dakota with Yoko, would not be signing autographs outside of it. He would know that he needs to pay attention. He would have had security driven into his brain, and instead of sitting out front signing autographs, he'd have driven his car into the garage.
Yeah.
Right? So I tried to deal with things like that where it's not outrageous to think that could happen. It doesn't involve some guy who came from the future, right? It's just how it could have gone down.
Right. So we'd have John Lennon today. Wouldn't that be a different world?
Well, he might still be dead by now of natural causes.
True.
What I did also with the book, and some fans get this, some don't, of course, but I tried to say things that were within the ability to change could change, but certain things like your physical illness stuff.
George Harrison.
George Harrison died because for the reasons that we know, right? Yeah. And I think it would be unlikely for me to change that. John Lennon was murdered. That can be changed.
Yeah.
All right. So and Linda McCartney died of cancer. That doesn't change just because I'm in an alternative universe, or it shouldn't change in my view. So I just tried to keep it grounded. Grounded is the word.
Now, before 1970, had Linda and Paul already met?
Oh, yeah.
So they were. I can't remember.
In fact, this is one of the great things of all time that I've dealt with. I started the changing arrow of history in 1968 in this book. I didn't wait and do it at the 1970 break. I started it earlier. For example, you bring up Paul and Linda. met each other much earlier, but they married in 1969, March of 69. And guess what? 1 week later, John and Yoko got married. All right? Now, here's the thing that'll blow your mind. None of the Beatles attended the other guy's wedding. Okay? So John didn't go to Paul. Paul didn't go to John. I come up with a scenario in this book where they would find it important to go to each other's weddings.
Wow.
And, you know, that can change a man.
Yeah.
If you're there with your best friend, you know, even if you're having a hell of a fight with him, but you go to his wedding, you're going to feel differently about things. So, and here's, if we have time, a real quick storyline.
Sure.
The book starts in 1968. And in 1968, for real, in our time frame, Paul and John, even though they weren't getting along, got on a plane, flew to New York City to announce and promote Apple, their new company. Okay? So they get there, and they get booked on The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson's out of town, and they end up doing The Tonight Show, John and Paul, 1968, April. They end up doing The Tonight Show with Joe Garagiola as the host, and Tallulah Bankhead as the drunken guest that night. Tallulah kind of heckled them, and Joe Garagiola was kind of clueless about anything Beatles, and they didn't have a good time. So it didn't really help in any way. Here's what happens in the book. Same thing, get on the plane, show up, but the first arrow of history diverts when they come to tell the Beatles in their hotel room, John and Paul, that guess what, Johnny Carson's not going to be here. You got a guest host tonight. And Lennon says, well, F that, I'm not coming. So they panic, and they call Johnny Carson, who's actually doing a comedy show in New Jersey, not far away, and say the Beatles aren't going to show up unless you show up. And Carson says he's not happy about this. He doesn't like being dictated on his own show, but he does know a get when he gets one, which is John and Paul would be a really big deal for his show. So he agrees to come back on one condition, that they do the entire show and they sing a few songs. All right? And so what ends up happening is the Beatles have at least John and Paul have one of the world's best times together. And they end up going out drinking afterwards with Ed McMahon and Johnny Carson. Okay? So that's how a little tiny thing can just kind of expand outward and turn into a kind of a joyous experience.
Yeah.
And so I hope that some of your listeners will give the book a try, and I certainly tried to write it with respect for fans, but also for people that don't know much about the Beatles. And I'll close with this. The highest compliment I keep getting from it is people go, I had to keep stopping and checking, what really happened, because it all sounded so real that I didn't know what was true and what wasn't.
That is a compliment. Just one last question. You're right, we are at the end here. What type of friendships did they have before the problems happened? I mean, were they very close?
Oh yeah, I mean, think about it. In the late 50s, early 60s, before they became the worldwide phenomenon that they were, these guys were living together, and literally in some of their gigs, when they were in Germany, they had this tiny room that all four of them would share, and they'd have to sleep. Two of them would sleep in the same bed, head to toe, right? I mean, that's how close they were.
Yeah.
They did everything together, and they were inseparable friends, and they adored each other at that time. They were tough guys. They were wearing leather back then, and they were having a good time, but they were learning music, but they were with their bros. And so they always worked together. John and Paul, in particularly, were very close, and were close from the beginning. I mean, those guys were writing together from the beginning, and it wasn't really, and they stayed close. And even when they were fighting, they were still close, but with problems, as we all have with close friends from time to time. So they had every reason to be able to find a basis for friendship buried in the friendship that they'd had. Very few people in the world, in fact, nobody. No, let's just say that. Nobody in the world had the experience that the Beatles had together. They got to the place where they had to hang with each other and support each other and have each other's back, because nobody else would, and nobody else was capable of understanding the experience that they were having.
That's right. There used to be an ad on the TV years ago that said, There'll never be another group quite like the Beatles.
Oh, that's, you know what? And probably back then some people heard it and said, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But guess what? It turned out to be true.
That's right. Your website one more time?
Okay, the main one is whatifbeatles.com,
Yeah.
and then if you want to see the video, it's morebeatles.com, and if you want to buy the book, it's amazonbeatles.com.
All right, excellent.